Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi, I'm Maria. I'm a grateful member of Alanon. And it's truly an honor and a privilege to be here today with my people, my family. Before I forget, I really want to thank this convention. I want to thank the committee. First, I'd like to thank Anthony for asking me. When he called, the words that have just been used about him repeatedly were enthusiasm, 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 and that's what I got on the phone. And I love people who are enthusiastic about this program because enthusiasm is infectious, and it does infuse me with the Spirit of God. And he was so excited about the convention, but also about getting married around the same time, and about going to SoCal, and about, he was just excited about life. And I love being around people like that, and I love meeting people like that. And also, just as a woman, it was so nice to hear a man that excited about his wedding, about planning it, about his bride-to-be, about everything else. And I just thought, and you know, seeing him up here today, thanking his committee with those tears in his eyes, you know, that's what the program does for us, is this man wears his heart on his sleeve. He's a gentleman in recovery, so he can wear his heart on his sleeve. When I first came in the program, you know, I hear a lot of people say, you know, oh, I don't want to get a sponsor. I have trust issues, you know. And when I first came in the program, my sponsor said, you're not going to trust until you become trustworthy, you know. And I would, first I got a buddy, and I would tell her my secrets before I tell my sponsor. And then I'd tell my sponsor, and then maybe I'd share it at a really small meeting where no one was there, and I'd only share like the secrets, and I'd act like they happened long ago, even though they had just happened that morning. And because I didn't want to appear too sick. Oh, I'm past that now. And after a while, you know, I found a God of my understanding, one of a few gods I found along the way as I've changed my higher power throughout the program, or my understanding of my higher power throughout the program. And once I trusted God, I didn't care who I trusted. And the fact that this gentleman can wear his heart on his sleeve and be where he is at the moment, express his feelings, express his thoughts, and be right there makes him completely trustworthy to me. And that's a fine example of what I am trying to be in this program, what I want to be when I grow up. And thank you so much for bringing your spirit to this convention. I want to thank Christine and Carol for getting me here and making sure I got the information. I want to thank my friends. A bunch of my friends came up to support me, and this is the kind of friends that I have. They are so cute. My friend Michelle took it upon herself to get a group of people together to come up here and surprise me. And she also took it upon herself to be my hostess. So she drove me up here this morning. She had coffee for me in the car. She's just coming up to the table. She's asking me if I need anything. She brought me a card. She's just doing what we do here. You know, we all just take turns doing it for each other. So she sent out a group email and she said, shh, don't tell Maria. But this is the list of the people who are coming. Remember, it's a surprise. Don't tell her anything. Keep your mouth shut. If you utter a word, this is top secret. I mean, it was like worse than being in the CIA. And then she copied me on the email list. So I hit reply to all. Thanks for the heads up. I love you guys. Thanks for the nice surprise. So, I came into the program the 13th of April, 1985. On that day, God literally saved my life, and I hope I remain forever grateful. My home group is the Westchester Stepped Up group in Westchester down by LAX. So if you're ever down by LAX at Thursday nights, come on by. Let's see what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. Hopefully I'll be able to remember. I didn't know I came from an alcoholic home, which was kind of a problem when I came to the program because I was still listening for the differences instead of for the similarities. And so I thought that because I didn't have, gunfire in the living room or, these big, horrific nightmare stories, that, that somehow I wasn't affected by alcoholism or I wasn't as bad. It took me coming to these meetings to catch the family disease of alcoholism. Like Dr. Paul used to say, it's a virus that goes in through your ears. The more you listen, the more you realize how sick you really are. And I came in, they talk about in the literature that, there are some of us who come in, unwanted, unloved, and alone, and there are some of us who come in arrogant, smug, self-righteous, and dominating. And I came in unwanted, unloved, and alone because I was so arrogant, smug, self-righteous, and dominating that no one wanted to be around me. And I would drink too. And I was definitely not a program of attraction. I was a program of promotion when I came in here. Always telling the alcoholic how great I was, and I was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and he was lucky to have me, and how dare you, and you better do this, and you better do that. And I had that Alanon finger going all the time. Never, like it says in the long form of the traditions in the big book, never finding it best to let our friends recommend us. I don't think I had any friends that would recommend me because I was too busy recommending myself to the alcoholic. But there was a lot of drinking in my home, and there was a lot of mood changing in my house. I could tell what was going to happen. People talk about they have the alert, where you can tell if mom's in a good mood or mom's in a bad mood. I didn't know that she was hungover. I didn't know that maybe it was coming up on cocktail time, or as she says, it's cocktail time somewhere in the world. But I just, life in our house revolved around the bar. And the first thing my parents did when we were when I was 6, we weren't all 6 together, when I was 6, we moved, and the first thing my parents did was they put in a huge bar, and then they went to Europe to get one of those big pub mirrors, a genuine pub mirror to hang behind the bar. And I've heard later that, from AA podiums that, because alcoholics like to watch themselves drink. But anyway, I was always the bartender. I made the martinis, I poured the beer. My parents had a secondary business, which was a beer and wine distributorship company. And alcoholics always love this part of my story because they start salivating. But literally, every week we would have this guy, some guy in some uniform or whatever, show up with a truck and a dolly, and he'd come rolling in with huge keg of fresh beer and cases of booze and scotch and vodka and everything else and wines, and he'd wheel it all in every week. And he'd go down the basement and undo the old keg and put in the new keg, and it was, that's just the way it was. And I knew how to pour the beer without too much head on it and all that stuff, and so it was fine. I never knew that drinking was a bad thing. I never knew there was a problem with it. There was nothing exciting that ever happened. One time, after my parents had a party, I came downstairs and I saw something that I thought was a squished dead animal in the house, and it was somebody's toupee. And another time I went to reach into the peanut bowl and I found somebody's false teeth. But other than that, everything seemed relatively normal. When I was 6 years old, was also a very important time in my life because I met my first him. And his name was Patrick, and he was the cutest, tallest, most awesome boy in the whole school. even though we were only 6. And we used to play tag, and he would chase me around the playground, and as I usually say to my friends, and I haven't been chased ever since, but I can still remember the feeling, and it was completely incredible. And not only would he chase me, but he ran like this. He'd scoop his hands and then kind of put his front teeth over his lips so he looked really cool, and he'd move his head like... And he'd sing, "Come on, baby, light my fire." And, boy, I love that. I wish I could meet a guy like that today, let me tell you. But anyway, so, and he used to come over to my... I would start at the other end, and we would go in the dark, and we would find our way through the coat closet, and we'd have day glow paint, cream on our faces, little dots on our faces so we could see each other in the dark, and we'd meet in the middle, and then we'd go, and we'd just smooch, and it was great. It was just incredible. It's like the first drink for me. It's like I will never forget that feeling. And I pursued that feeling to the gates of insanity or death. I loved that feeling. It was awesome. And I spent my life in Nancy Drew books. I spent my life with one best friend. Both things, I think, showing me that I was a pre-Alanon, one wanting to be a detective, otherwise spying on the alcoholic, and the other one always having one best friend because basically I would just control her until she didn't do things my way, and then I would ditch her and go find a new best friend. I consider that disloyalty. And so I was, relatively isolated kid, but again, I can't say it's because my parents drank or they didn't drink or they're alcoholic or they're not alcoholic. They don't call themselves alcoholic. It's really none of my business. These are some of the things that I did as a kid. I was already very controlling. Another one of the things I saw about me as a kid, a defect, if you want to call it, a symptom of alcoholism, the family disease, if you want to call it that, was competition. I had that from a very young age. My first competition was female competition. That was my mom. And I competed for my dad's attention all the time. And my dad worked a lot. And so every night when he came home very late, I knew I only had a few minutes of time before it was time for me to eat and before it was time for me to go to bed. And then my parents would eat a later dinner together. And so we'd have like chicken or something like that. And then my dad would come home and he would get a steak. And so during that 10 or 15 minutes that I got to be with my dad at the table and my mom, I would crawl on my hands and knees around the table to his side of the table, and I would sit up on my hind legs, and I'd hold my little front paws up, and I'd stick my tongue out, and I'd pant like a little dog, and then he would give me a piece of steak. And that was a pattern that I also set up very, very early in my life, was I spent the rest of my life in relationships with people where I was always begging for a little piece of steak. That's all I wanted. I just wanted a little piece of steak. If you just gave me a little piece of steak, that little bit of attention, I'm going to be okay. Unfortunately, as my disease progressed, that little piece of steak wouldn't be enough. That little bit of attention wouldn't be enough. That little bit of validation, that little bit of looking to the outside world to solve an inside problem of a spiritual nature, a spiritual emptiness, that little bit started not to be enough. And then I need a little bit more. And then I'd have to sell out my morals just a little bit more to fill up that space. And then a little bit more. And a double shot and a triple shot. And maybe somebody would be married. And I would commit adultery with that person because, number one, I justified it. Another one of my defects of character, justification and blame, irresponsibility, not taking responsibility. I'd say, well, I'm not committing adultery. He is, because he's the one that's married. I wasn't raised that way. I was raised with morals. I was raised with manners. I was raised in a good home, as far as teaching me how to do the right thing. But as my disease progressed, that little piece of steak, like Chuck Chamberlain talked about in A New Pair of Glasses, about how he would sit in that chair and he would overlook the channel between Laguna and Catalina Island. And he'd look at that water and he'd say, if that water was alcohol, it still wouldn't be enough. And that's exactly how my disease is. When I am not filled with God and I'm looking to a him or I'm looking to a her outside of me, I've got to have my best friend do it my way, or I've got to have a him love me, or I've got to have them like me or want me for that job, or whatever it is. When I'm looking to an outside solution for an inside problem, it's never going to be enough. It may fix me with that immediate gratification for a few seconds. But in the end, all the selling out that I have to do of all of my standards and my beliefs and my morals would never be worth it, because it would rip out an even bigger hole in my gut, and then I have even more space that I need to fill. And I need even more people to make that be okay, or more things, or more money, property, and prestige, or whatever it was. For me, it wasn't so much money and property. It would be more like the prestige or wanting people to like me or approve of me. So I would beg for that piece of steak, and then I would go to bed. And then my sister was born, and she became my second competition. And again, my parents didn't make me this way. I don't know why I turned out this way. I believed in God. I was told about God. I went to Sunday school from a very young age by myself, because I asked my parents, to go by myself. I went for years, every Sunday by myself, from the time I was 6 and 7 years old. But there was something inside of me at a very young age that told me that because my sister was there was suddenly less love for me. I didn't know that it was an abundant universe. I didn't know that God loves all of us and that we're all His kids. I didn't know that He doesn't have any grandchildren. I didn't know that if He was loving you, or if something really great was happening in your life, or there was newlyweds and fun to celebrate somebody's wedding, I didn't know that that didn't mean there was less for me. I didn't know how to revel in that before. I didn't know how to be grateful for that before. Because I thought, something's going to happen now. That means that God's not going to give me mine, or I'm not going to get mine. Because again, this disease, by the way, just to go off topic for a second, because I just thought of Bob's talk. For those of you who didn't hear Bob L. this morning talk, you need to get the tape. It was such an excellent talk on service and the traditions. And please get the tape, because it's like, he's a walking encyclopedia of this program. But anyway, he talked a lot about selfishness, and that's the root of our disease. And this whole program is designed, and the steps and the traditions and the concepts and everything else, we're here to clean ourselves out with those steps and then enable us to turn ourselves inside out through service to be of service, get out of selfishness into selflessness. And I so identify with that, because that's what this program's all about. That's where the key to happiness is. And I didn't know that when I was young. From a very young age, I believed the lie. And I don't know where I got the lie in my head. But the lie was, I'm only going to be happy, or life is only okay, if you feel about me the way I want you to feel about me. I didn't know that the truth is I'm only going to be okay if I feel about you the way that I need to feel about you to serve my purpose, which is I need to love rather than be loved. I need to worry about comforting rather than being comforted. I need to try to understand rather than be understood. Like it says in our St. Francis prayer, not our St. Francis prayer, one that we were allowed to print up in some of our literature. To the newcomers, you can get a copy of your St. Francis prayer on the back of your bookmark that comes in your newcomers packet. But anyway, so as a kid, I was still just kind of scrambling around looking for love. And like I said, I don't know why. When I was 19 years old, I went to a bar and I decided to have a one-night stand. I don't know what made me think it was my first one-night stand. I don't know why I thought this was such a big deal, other than other symptoms, denial, comparing, superiority, inferiority. The worse I feel about myself, the more I have to act like I'm better than. And so I decided to be like all those other you-know-whats and just go pick up some guy at a bar, and I'm going to show them. And I went to a bar, and there was a band playing, and I scoped out the band, and I saw who was with whom and what they were doing. And there was one guy, and he was playing keyboards, and his eyes were red, and his face was white, and he had like red rims around his eyes, and he was kind of like rocking his head back and forth. His head was like lolling on his neck. He was kind of like a white blonde Stevie Wonder, and he was just, tripping, and so I decided that was the guy for me. And so they were on break, and I decided to go pick him up. And after they went through a few more sets, and afterwards I asked him if I could buy him a drink. And he said, "No, I don't drink." And I said, "Well, what, do you smoke dope?" Because he was red-eyed and everything else. And he said, "No, I don't do anything since I smashed my truck into the front of the Bank of America on Lancashire 25 days ago. I stopped drinking and I went to AA because I'm afraid the cops are going to come after me." And my first thought was, oh, he doesn't have a car, so he needs a ride home. He needs me. Certainly my question. It's kind of like the online dating thing. Their qualification is they own a computer. So I picked him up, and thus began our 3.5-year one-night stand. I would go to meetings with him 5 to 7, 8 times a week. I was in AA meetings for years with this man. And I was in AA meetings because there was something in my mind. Again, nobody put this thought there. This is just kind of my own little peon thinking. Somebody put the thought in my mind that somehow if I missed one of the AA meetings with him, that was going to be the meeting where the format of the meeting was all the female alcoholics are going to come in braless wearing white undershirts and sit on the men's laps and wriggle. All the guys are going, I could go to that meeting. I still have yet to see any wriggling going on in any program, but at the time, but of course that came from my jealousy, my insecurity, my feeling that I wasn't good enough, and competition one more time. And I would sit there and I would sob in those AA meetings, and I would think, look at those people giving them cakes, and they brought their baby with them, and they're giving them a cake, and isn't this incredible? And I would have so much compassion for the alcoholics up there. And then we would go home, and I would treat the alcoholic in my life like garbage. I had no compassion for him. I had no understanding of the disease of alcoholism. I didn't know that this guy was barely sober, barely hanging on by a thread. He had drank from a very young age, and this was the first time in his life he was trying to experience life sober. And I was busy saying, did you call information? Well, did you ask for it under LA? Well, did you ask for it under Santa Monica? Well, why didn't you think of that? And why didn't you do that? And why didn't you love me the way I want you to love me? And are you eating too many chocolate chip cookies? And you're drinking too much coffee? And when's the last time I was non-stop. It's amazing that man stayed sober. Really. Seriously. It's so sad because the grace of God kept this man sober. Because he was living with a hellion. He was living with someone who, my drink, my disease is selfishness and self-centeredness. And I want to make you, love me, and I want to make you do what I want you to do so I feel okay about me. Taking. Always focused on him. Because alcohol didn't work for me. I drank, I smoked weed, I did all the stuff. I tried it. If it could have worked, it would have. I tried. It just didn't work for me. The only thing that works for me is getting involved in relationships that have a tremendous amount of fear of intimacy and inability to commit, which I get to learn here in these meetings, so that I can always have torque. Because if I pick a relationship where somebody wants to be in 100%, I don't know what to do with that. I need to be in a relationship with someone whose arm up is all the time. Because if I put my arm up, I have to look like the bad guy and take responsibility. So I pick people who have their arm up, and we can still do the alcoholic dance. When he moves back, I move forward. When I move back, he moves forward. We can still do the dance, but then I can throw my defects of character of blame and need to be a victim in there, because don't you know, look what he's doing to me. And then I learned in the program years later, do you know, this absolutely stumped me. And I'm sure you guys are way ahead of me on this, and you probably already figured this out, but it took me years to figure this out. Did you know, still gets me to this day, that people who can handle commitment don't stay in relationships with people who can't handle commitment? I didn't know that. I thought you were supposed to stay in for years and complain. I thought you were supposed to stay in for years and be miserable and make them miserable, run out another one of my defects of character, vengeance, make them pay, right? Threatening to leave, doing all those things. I thought I was supposed to stay in the relationship just to make them miserable so that they would feel as bad about themselves as I felt about myself so they wouldn't leave. That's what I thought a relationship was, which explains why I'm single. So I'm going to put that on my resume. I didn't know anything about the traditions. I didn't know anything about working the traditions at home. I didn't know anything about the St. Francis prayer. I didn't know anything about honoring a man. I didn't know anything about honoring the differences between men and women. You know, I wanted to make men into my girlfriend and, you know, make them chatty when they weren't chatty, or make them, you know, whatever. They come home after a long day of work and I want them to sit there and chat for 12 hours like a girl would, you know, and it's like, that's why you have girlfriends, you know. I had no idea that men and women were different, you know. So after a few years of this poor man being able to stay sober in spite of me and by the grace of God, because I was so controlling and because I was his mom, what happens for me when I become somebody's mom in a relationship is that relationship becomes platonic. Because a man doesn't want to have anything other than a platonic relationship with their mother, at least, hopefully. And so because I wasn't getting that validation and that fix and being able to find myself attractive to someone, I started to get worse and worse about selling myself out. And that's when I did commit adultery. And that's when I did have affairs with people I shouldn't have been involved with because they had girlfriends back in New York or whatever. I would always pick someone, you know, whether he was unavailable geographically, logistically, emotionally, chemically, alcoholically. There was something that always kept them unavailable. Because, again, I didn't have Alanon. I didn't have any knowledge of the disease of alcoholism had affected me as a person, and that I was so bandaged up in my own disease and covered up and crusted over with my defects of character that there was no way I was ever going to have true intimacy and partnership with another human being. And so I started going out there and doing whatever I did to try to get that fix. And a lot of the stuff I did, I am not proud of, and I look at it now in my past, and I share it with you because I need to share it with you. But to be honest with you, I look at that person now and I say, I can't even believe that's who I was. That's so not who I am today. I am a lady in recovery today. And as a result of selling myself out with those men, dressing in ways I shouldn't be dressed, in places I shouldn't have been, and in essence, I got pregnant many times and terminated those pregnancies. I would have way older children today. I would have adults as my kids today. I got raped. I almost was gang raped, was chased down the street literally by a gang because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, trying to get validation from a guy. So I was dressed in the wrong way, in the wrong part of town, so that he would think it was kinky and cool. I was held prisoner by two men in a room. I have basically gone to the bottom of degradation and humiliation because of my need to have somebody say, okay, baby, you're the prettiest, you're the best, you're the sexiest, whatever it was. And so it's no mistake that by 23, I had hit bottom. And I came into Alanon at 23. All of that stuff happened within a 4-year period. That's how hard and how fast I hit my bottom. And something happened, which I call the grace of God, or I hope is the grace of God, because it's totally awesome. I wound up breaking up with this man and my boyfriend, the one who was in AA, and I had been cheating on him, and I broke up with the married guy, and I broke up, with the team, and I I quit my job, and I was sitting at home. I was completely depressed. I wouldn't answer the phone. I had an electronic system where you couldn't even get through to my phone line. It wouldn't even ring my answering machine unless you had a special code. And then you'd hit the answering machine. And then I'd decide if I was going to call you back. And I hadn't called people back in months and hadn't picked up the phone. And what I didn't realize at the time, and I didn't realize till a few years into the program, was I had already overdosed once on Valium when I was in high school. I had gone into my dad's medicine cabinet and had gotten to the point where I was so depressed that I had overdosed. But I, by the grace of God, woke up sideways on the floor next to my own vomit, and I didn't asphyxiate on my vomit. Because God knew I had, things to do. And I had cups to pick up at the Windsor Club and Alanon Club in Glendale. And I'm so grateful, that He wanted me to pick up those cups, because I still love picking up styrofoam cups to this day. It just makes me feel good all over. And I'm a cheap date. Take me to a landfill. We'll have a blast. Anyway, I didn't remember committing suicide. So on the morning I was going to commit suicide in 1985, I was feeling my ribs for where I was going to stick the knife. And I was thinking about, people had talked about how to slit your wrists, and I was afraid that I was going to do it wrong and I wasn't really going to die. And for years, I had been driving up the 5 freeway. My boyfriend, being the musician, he would perform sometimes down in Orange County. And every night, I would drive home from his gig, and I would say, okay, this, those giant cement things that hold up the bridges on the 5 freeway. And I'd say, okay, this is the one I'm going to drive into. Okay, this is the one I'm going to drive into, because I wanted to have a way to kill myself where my parents wouldn't think that I really killed myself. Because that's all I cared about really, was what they were going to think, because they were so into not wanting to look bad, that I wanted it to look like an accident. And I never did it. And finally one morning I'd really hit bottom. I had quit this high-paying job. I had I was a big network executive at a very young age, and I had a high-paying job and a big expense account, and some guy had lied about my age, and I was making, deals worth millions, and I was, I quit that job. I couldn't handle getting out of bed. I quit the relationships and everything else, and it was months later, and I was feeling my ribs for where I was going to stick the knife, because I knew that slitting my wrist, I'd probably screw it up. And the phone rang that day. And I don't know why I picked up the phone, other than the fact that I was going to kill myself, and, usually that would be a great way to stall, And the phone rang, and it was a friend of mine, and she said, she had also been dating an alcoholic, but her alcoholic was not going to AA. He was trying to stay sober, and I use that in quotes, via the Valium method, which, for those of you who don't know about the disease of alcoholism, that's not really sober. I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek, because sober means nothing that affects you from the neck up. But anyway, so she called me, and she said, I'm going to kill myself. I need you to take me to a mental institution. Now, if it were today, I would say, and it has happened in the program, when I was going through a really big surrender point, I would say what I did years later, which is, really, I was going to kill myself today too. How are you going to do it? Come on, let's go to lunch, and then we'd have a big laugh and it would all be over. But that day is such a microcosm of the way God has shown me this program, because I didn't have one asset left. I was not compassionate. I was mean. I was introverted. It was all about me. It was selfish, self-centered. Everything was about the way I feel and what they did to me, and blame and irresponsibility and immaturity and all those things. And I didn't have any assets left. And God took my defects of arrogance, smugness, self-righteousness, needing to be dominant, needing to know it all, needing to have all the answers. If anyone had called me that day and said, Maria, I think you need help. Will you come to an Alanon meeting with me? I would have said, no, I don't need any help. Thank you very much. There's no way I could have responded to that. But He took all of my defects of character, the only things I had left, and in my rude, egotistical, selfish, smug way, I said, you don't need to go to a mental institution. You need to go to Alanon. I will call the office and we'll go to a meeting. And that's how I got to Alanon on the 13th of April, 1985. And that's what God has done for me all the way along. Even when I don't have assets to use, He uses whatever I have because He's my creator and He created me good and bad. And He's willing to use all of me if I'm willing to let Him use all of me. And if He uses my defects today to make you pray for me, well, then you know what? You're getting closer to your God. So God bless you. Thanks for praying for me. But my life is so good a lot of the time because I got a lot of people praying for me. But anyway, thus began my journey into Alanon. And I wound up in that Alanon club at the Windsor Club in Glendale. And there were all those little blue-haired old ladies, and they just saved my life. And I loved it. I loved it. I went to 11 meetings a week. For years, I was always in the meetings. I couldn't be away from the meetings. Especially the first year, I couldn't be away from the meetings because I was afraid that if I was alone, I was still going to try to commit suicide. And so I would sit in the Alanon Club hours early, and I would go out for coffee late. There's so many people I ran into today who I've known for years, either at the Chapter 9 meeting or at all the meetings in Silver Lake and Hollywood and all that stuff. That's so great to see people I haven't seen in years. And I just hung on. I hung on for dear life. And then I started going to meetings in La Cañada, and those women were more like my moms, and they adopted me. And then I went to, the Chapter 9 meeting, and those couples were like the first couples I could see that gave me hope that marriages could be great, and people could love each other. They could fight one week and not sit with each other, and then the next week they'd be holding hands. And it was so awesome to get these examples. It was like this extended family of all these goofy people who just accepted me the way I was. And you guys, they say your example speaks so loud I can't hear a word you're saying. And your example spoke so loud I couldn't hear a word you were saying. Because I was so happy to be someplace where all I had to say was, "Hi, my name is Maria." And you guys said, "Hi, Maria." That was it. Nobody cared where I came from, who I was related to, how much money I made, didn't make, if I was working, if I wasn't working, all of that stuff. All I had to do was say, "Hi, Maria," and you guys said, "Hi, Maria," back, and that was good enough. It was good enough, And I had never been within myself. Maybe people had told me that. I grew up in the 70s. My dad used to say, in the 70s, it was like, Ms. Magazine was born, and, Bella Abzug and Gloria Steinem and all these people were on television all the time. And I had a dad who, I was really pretty lucky. I had a dad who would sit me down every night and go, people are going to tell you that you have to be a stewardess. You don't have to be a stewardess if you don't want to. You can be a pilot. People are going to tell you have to be a nurse. You don't have to be a nurse if you don't want to. You can be a doctor. I had people believing in me. But I felt so low about myself that it just seemed like, don't tell me that stuff. It's more expectations. You're setting the bar too high. That's even more for me to fail at. For some reason, it just always had the reverse effect because one more time, I had that dis-ease of a spiritual nature within me, that just could not be fixed no matter how many things I heard from the outside. And when I came in here and you guys accepted me just the way I was, and I would pick up those cups, or I would get the coffee commitment, and I'd totally screw up, and I'd run out of gas and borrow money from the coffee commitment, and then I'd not remember how much I borrowed, and then I'd throw in extra, and I screwed up every commitment. Everything I did wrong. I had a secretary commitment one time where they were going through construction. It was a huge room, not this big, but probably about a third of this size. They were going through construction at that church. And I would get to that meeting like an hour and a half or 2 hours early every single week for a year. And there was plaster dust all over the floor because of construction. And I would get out this wet mop in this bucket. And I knew nothing about mopping. I was a spoiled little girl, And I would get out that mop and that bucket, and I would be there 2 hours early, and I'd mop that entire floor. It was huge. And I'd mop it, and it would be shiny, and then it would dry, and the plaster dust would appear again. I never cleaned up any of it. I just was kind of swishing it around, but I did it every week for a year. And it made me feel special that I was mopping dust. I cleaned the dust. We had the cleanest dust anywhere. And I just loved it. I felt like I was home. And you know what? Quite frankly, I have never lost that feeling for this program. I have been on pink clouds for years, and then there's times I haven't been in pink clouds for years. But I've never lost that original feeling. You know, to this day, if I see a piece of butcher paper taped above a door with a sign, it does my heart good. I love butcher paper. There's something about it. It makes me feel great. I looked at these beautiful decorations on the table walking in here today, and I just thought, you know, that's just awesome. That's just awesome. Anyway, I got a sponsor immediately. I had watched this alcoholic, and I knew what to do. And I got a sponsor immediately, and I couldn't hear a word she said. And my whole first year, you know, I'd say, I tried to get back with the alcoholic, and my whole first year, I'd say, yeah, but he, 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 yeah, but he. That's all, folks. You know, that's all I said all the time. And finally, one time, she turned and she spun on her little hill. She was about this tall. She was 72 years old. She spun on her heel, and she looked up at me, and she goes, look, I want you to imagine a piece of paper. And I want you to make 2 lines down the paper to make 3 columns. At the top of the first column, I want you to write Rick's responsibilities. At the top of the third column, I want you to write God's responsibilities. Stay in your own column. That's all I remember from my first year. That's all I could get. It was just way too complicated, my first 10 months. And I did get another sponsor and started working the steps, and I got to read my first 5th step. She had me do the 4-column method from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got to read about my part in things, and I got to read about my resentments, and I got to read about all my sex relationships and the ways that I had used people and all of that stuff, and my fears. And I also wrote about things I had lied about, and I wrote about feelings about money and all of this stuff. And I got to read that first 5th step when I was 1 year old out in Palm Springs. And I drove home from Palm Springs. She had rented a house out there. And I drove home from Palm Springs, and they have all those little windmills, you know, that part out in the desert, and there's like those thousands of windmills. And they had said it feels like you've taken a shower on the inside, or like the wind could blow clear through you. And I saw those thousands of windmills in my rearview mirror, and I had my Polaroid camera in my car because as a wannabe detective, you always have to have a camera because you might catch somebody doing something wrong. And so I stuck my Polaroid camera out the window, and I took a picture of those windmills, and I had that picture until it got covered with so much toothpaste spittle and everything from being on my sink that it eventually just peeled open and disappeared. But it was the greatest feeling in the world. And a few years into the program, I met a man, and we were going to live happily ever after on the AA campus. And it was just, you know, and, you know, they say people will tell you who they are immediately. And on our first date, he said to me, I don't break up with people. I just push them away till they break up with me. And I went, oh, okay, could you pass the bread? Because don't you know, when your ego's involved, when my ego's involved, I'm not going to hear that. I'm going to hear, challenge. Not me. Everybody else but me. My case is different. Yeah, but you don't understand. I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. So anyway, so we spent the next 3.5 years in program doing the alcoholic dance one more time. And I had to do that in the program. I had to become his mother in the program. I had to get involved in another platonic relationship in the program. Because before the program, I was so numb and I was so unaware. You know, they talk about awareness, acceptance, and action. I was so unaware that I couldn't see it. You know, it talks about in the Big Book about, you know, that we put our hand on the hot flame and we can't feel it. When I came in the program, because I was starting to become aware of my defects of character, I had to redo everything in the program that I did outside of the program, because now I had to see, ow, this hurts. And it was the first time I could actually feel through the static of my constant emotional upheaval, which I had before I came here. So I learned a lot of valuable lessons in that relationship, and I'm grateful that I stayed for the time that I did in that relationship. And it taught me a lot. And that man too is also still a long time sober, and he's a friend of mine and a great guy. And I've been very blessed with, you know, I tease about the men that I've been involved with, but actually, you know what? I'm very, very lucky, because all the men I've been involved with are actually really, really nice people. They're really nice men. And anyway, a lot of things happened during the time in the program. After I broke up with him, I was going through, you know, it takes me, you know, they say normies, you know, it takes them about half the time to get over a relationship that they were in the relationship. It takes me like 3 times the amount of time I was actually in the relationship to get over the relationship. Because one more time, Because alcohol didn't work for me, I have my Alanon delusions. I have my ideas. I will grieve what I wanted the relationship to be and who I thought the person was and who I wanted the person to be long after I'm actually grieving the actual person. And that one more time is just a symptom of my selfishness, that I'm wanting to see what I want to see instead of accepting them for who they are. So I was going through all of that, and I had some animals that died, and one night I was at an Alanon party, and my best friend, someone I sponsored for 5 years, she's a very young girl, she got a headache, and we took her to the hospital, and she died instantly. She had a brain aneurysm, and it was a terrible time, and I got very, very sad, and then I got more and more and more depressed. And I thought that I was working the steps enough, and I would be able to get out of it. To make a long story short, I found out that the reason I wasn't feeling well and it was taking so long was because I was very sick. And a woman came up to me and she said, I don't usually mix my profession with my program, but I'm a doctor, and you need to go to the doctor tomorrow because you're really sick and you can die. And then, of course, she told everyone in my home group, which is, a reason to have a home group because they keep an eye on you. And so I called the doctor, and I went to the doctor, and he said, yeah, you're in an advanced state of hyperthyroidism, and your kidneys are gone, and your heart's, in really bad shape, and you could drop dead at any moment. And, when somebody says you can drop dead at any moment, my first thought is, I think I need a second opinion. And so thank God I called this other guy, and this guy said, you need to lay down on an operating table now. Let's go across the street to, the hospital. So I called this other guy for a second opinion. He said, no, if you get surgery now, your thyroid could explode and you will die. He said, you cannot do that. So anyway, I went and got a second opinion. For the next 4 or 5 years, I basically, because of hormone levels and all the stuff going on in my body, I was absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. It was like going through menopause and PMS and being a teenager and postpartum all at the same time. And, I gained tons of weight, I lost tons of weight, I gained tons of weight, I lost my hair. I mean, it was just a horrible, horrible time in this program for years. And all I knew was to keep coming back, to keep showing up, to keep doing what you guys taught me how to do. And because I had gotten in the habit of doing that, it saved me. It absolutely saved my life. Along the way, I'd like to share briefly just a couple things on, I know you guys are getting post-carb fatigue, so I'll let you go. But I want to share about 2 things in particular. As far as working the traditions in my family, along the way, throughout the years, after I started to feel better, I kind of settled into my program. Things started to change. It continued to change. I've been able to experience things every year in this program. It's just so hard to put it in, obviously in this tiny little time frame. And I want to get to what's going on now because it's really exciting. And because it hasn't been exciting up to now. But anyway, the 5th tradition, when it talked about, I remember having a spiritual experience one time in a meeting when I looked up those traditions, and I had looked at that chart for so many meetings. And I was looking at that 5th tradition, and it said, encouraging and understanding our alcoholic relatives. And I can't remember how many years I had in the program, maybe 3 or 4 years when I saw that for the first time. Really saw it. And I thought, I don't have to be nice to my family and loving to my family when they behave properly, or when they do it my way, or when they're not fighting at Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas or repeating themselves if they're drunk or nagging or scolding or complaining or all the other qualifications I had on there for answering their phone calls or being kind and loving or being of service to them. I have to be kind and loving to my family because it says to do so in the traditions. That's it. It really doesn't matter about my opinion about it. They really don't need my judgment. I don't need to check off the list, and if you all act this way, this way, this way, this way, then I will carry my program into the outside world. That was such a mind-blowing experience. I just need to do it because it says it on the thing that hangs on the wall. And that allowed me to put principles above personalities. I had to use the principles. I had learned about the traditions and, in relationships and in my dating life, and that there was only one authority, and it wasn't me, and it wasn't him, too. That if he was in a bad mood or whatever, I didn't have to take it upon myself. I didn't have to feel less than or feel afraid or cower, because I can go the other way, too, and get very afraid and let people bully me, believe it or not. And so I had learned about unity of the group. I had learned about practicing that at work, and not having to always be the prima donna or telling people what to do, even though in my job I kind of was always the one in charge of telling people what to do. But I learned how to do it while still treating people with respect and getting participation, talking about, they're reading the concepts today, that participation, encouraging that in everybody. I had learned about those traditions, but that fifth tradition blew my mind. And throughout the years, I just got closer and closer and closer to my family, and that's not an easy thing to do, as I'm sure some of you have the same similar experience. My mother, they actually have security gates, and if my mother doesn't feel like letting you in the security gates, you don't get in the security gates, and that's my mother. She's an interesting lady. Some people have little nicknames for their children, Honey Bunny and, Love and, all that stuff. My mom's nickname for me was the Ice Princess, so... It was a tough room, let me tell you. It was a tough dinner table. But anyway, I knew that I had to carry this program into my home. And a few years ago, I made the decision that I was going to get my parents hooked on a television show, because they like to watch TV, and I like to watch this show. And I would get them hooked on this television show that I had to explain to them. So they watched it the first time, and they didn't need me to explain it to them. And then my dad said, well, now we have a problem. You have to come over every week and watch the show with us and explain it. And that's what I was hoping for. And every week since then, even when the show isn't on and it's on summer break or whatever, we'll go out to dinner, do something else. Every week I go over to my parents' house, because I don't want to be one of those people who writes the note. I've heard all the stories of the people, and I'm so grateful that people have had that experience, and that you, because of the steps in this program, if you have lost a loved one, you can go to that graveside and you can read that letter. Or you can go to the ocean, or you can go to a fire and burn it, or you can go fishing and throw it in their favorite fishing hole, or whatever it is. I'm so grateful that people can do that and make amends to loved ones who have passed. But my parents are still alive, and they're getting older. And why do I have to sit around and wait to be the one that after they've passed, that I'm one of those ones that writes the note? I don't want to be one of those ones that writes the note. I want to be as vulnerable as I can. And right now, my dad and I have kind of gone a little split, or I should say I have gone a little split again away from my dad. And so that's stuff that I'm in the middle of right now, that I'm coming back this way. But for the most part, I have been more and more and more vulnerable with my parents. I have been there. I accept them for who they are. I enjoy the play. I go over and I watch the play. Sometimes they're drunk, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're sweet, sometimes they're mad. Sometimes they're whatever. But it doesn't matter. What am I going to do at their gravesite? Say, I'm sorry I didn't talk to you for years because you hurt my feelings? Are my feelings that important? That you can't hurt my feelings? And I'm going to make you pay? I'm going to make me pay. I don't need to do that. They say with certain children when they're born, they get the blessing. They feel like they're okay, that no matter what they do, they're all right. And sometimes children, just for whatever reason, they don't get that blessing, or they don't feel the blessing. And the only way to feel that blessing is to give that blessing to your parents. And I've been able to do that. And I've been able to love them for who they are. And in turn, I feel it back. And I know my parents love me. And I know my parents are proud of me. And I know I love them. And I know I'm proud of them. And that's awesome. My sister and I always hated each other. And I was just not the maid of honor. One of her bridesmaids in her best friend was her maid of honor. And in this beautiful wedding in Arizona last Thanksgiving, almost a year ago. And she married a great guy. And I think, 30 days before the wedding, he went into AA. So that'll be a fun journey to watch. And so you know, it's been an awesome ride with my family. The one last thing I want to share is I was always in the same career. And I had always heard people in this program talk about, you know, that they would say to their sponsor, well, I'm 50 years old, I can't go to law school. By the time I get out of law school, I'm going to be, you know, 55 or whatever. And their sponsor would say, well, you're going to be 55 anyway. You want to be 55 or you want to be a 55-year-old lawyer, you know? And I would hear people talking about pursuing their dreams and doing their art and doing their music and doing their whatever. And I just thought, you know, those are such great stories, but that's not me. You know, I'm never going to be one of those ones that have one of those follow your dream stories because I never had a dream. I've had a really, by comparison to what's going on in the world today, I have had a very fortunate life. Alanon was a dream come true that I never even knew I had. So to me, I never thought beyond what I had. And I pretty much, quite frankly, thought that, well, I've had my share. And a few years ago, I decided to give up my career and decided to try something new. And, you know, financially, emotionally, and otherwise, it was an interesting journey. And the reason I'm telling you this story, because I don't usually talk about my career, but it's just such an amazing thing, is I wound up writing a bunch of stuff that was part of my old job, but this time I only wanted to do writing. And as a result of writing this stuff, you know, I didn't sell anything. I got some good reactions, but, you know, it was an interesting experience. But I got to see that I followed through on stuff. I could be self-motivated. I could do things that a procrastinator and a fearful person like me can't do. And that's really the moral of this story for me that I have to keep in mind is my defects of character stopped being my higher power. They stopped running my life. The principles of this program overrode my personality, my defects, and allowed me to start doing things that I never would have done before. I'm somebody who doesn't follow through. I'm extremely lazy. I just don't do anything. I'm totally happy doing nothing. I really am. I'm totally happy doing absolutely nothing. And, you know, and if it involves pizza, I'm even happier. And so anyway, one day this guy called me and he said, listen, I want you to write some stuff. I've got this off-Broadway thing going, and I want you to write some sketches for me. And so I said, okay. And normally I would have procrastinated. He said, I need them by next February. And he called me in November. And I thought, well, you know what I'm going to do? My first thought was, I'm just not going to call him. And then after the holidays, I'm going to say, well, my ski trip went longer, and this happened, so I didn't quite get around to it. Oh, I'm sorry, it's too late to send them to you. And without even thinking, because that defect does not belong to me anymore. Once you've truly taken the seventh step on something, you know, a long-timer, my friend Vinoy talks about, it becomes, with some of our defects of character, some of them I'll have, you know, I'm sure forever, but with some defects of character, they're so strong, or they've been so removed that it would be like picking up somebody else's purse. It just feels that weird to go pick it up again. And the next thought that went in my mind was, no, just do what he asked you to do. And not only did I send him one thing or two things, I wound up sending him more and sending more and sending more. And I wound up sending him like 12, 14, 15 things as a result of this program, because my defects of character do not have to rule my life today. And he called me after that project was over, and he said, listen, I've got the rights to this thing, and I've wanted to write a musical for the last 8 years, and I've done some of the songs. He's a music guy, and he's a composer and lyricist. And he said, and I need somebody to write the book, the script for this musical, and I want you to be the person. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I had no idea what I was doing. But I know how to be a newcomer because of being here. And I know how to be a good newcomer because I have time in the program now. I can look back and see how to be a good newcomer. So I was able to ask all these questions and ask for guidance and say I don't know when I didn't know. And I wound up, and he said, and not only would you be the perfect person for the project, but I really want to work with you because you're such a self-starter. And then I knew he had the wrong number, right? So 40 days later, I called him, and I said, okay, I've got it. And he said, got what? And I said, I have the script. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, the thing you asked me to write. And he said, no. You're supposed to call me in like a year and tell me that, what was the thing again? And, you know, maybe you get around to it and whatever. And I said, no, you asked me to write it, so I did it. Anyway, for the last 2 years, well, probably year and a half. We had a 10-month hiatus there because I was in a horrible car accident with two friends of mine, and with that hiatus in the middle, it's been basically about a year and a half. And since of time, and he said it was going to take 10 years, but it's been a year and a half. We've had 3 readings. We have investors. I'm going back to New York in a couple of days. And within a few months, probably after the first of the year, we're going to be starting rehearsals for our Broadway show. I never even knew I wanted to write a Broadway show. I didn't even know what Broadway was. I mean, I knew it was somewhere in New York, but this is not, I didn't even know I had the dream. And one more time, that's the grace of God. I didn't have to have the dream even for Him to give me the power to carry it out. He gave me the dream. Then He gave me knowledge of His will for me. And then He gave me the power to carry it out. And guess what? If the whole thing can blow up tomorrow, just like anything else. And I am enjoying the you-know-what out of the journey. I am totally in the moment of enjoying each day. And if it's not meant to happen, somebody else is going to call me and go, you know, I was thinking about you the other day. I've got something I want you to do. Because we say yes to life here. It starts out by saying yes to program commitments. It starts out by saying yes to the program. And the next thing you know, we're saying yes to life. We're saying yes to loving. We're saying yes to wearing our hearts on our sleeve. We're saying yes to being of service. We're saying yes to, I can be vulnerable and not care what your reaction is. I don't need to get it back. That's not my job, is to get it back. My job is to give it out. And I am so grateful for all of you teaching me that message. And I'm just so grateful. Once again, thank you very much for having me here.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. And let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. and I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.